The voicemail was 43 seconds long. I know the exact length because I played it 7 times in the parking lot of the grocery store, sitting in my car with the engine running and a bag of oranges on the passenger seat. 43 seconds. Not long enough to hold an entire secret. Long enough to unravel 3 years. But I am getting ahead of myself. My name is Claire, and at 34, I thought I understood the shape of my life. Not perfectly, nobody does, but well enough. I had a 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet part of Columbus, Ohio, on a street with big maple trees that turned copper every fall. I had a job I didn't love but could live with, doing marketing research for a mid-sized insurance company. I had a sister, Rachel, who called every Sunday and talked too long about her kids. And I had Daniel. Daniel and I had been together for 3 years. We had met through a mutual friend at a going-away party for someone neither of us was particularly close to. We had stood by the same food table, both pretending to be interested in the guacamole, and ended up talking for 2 hours about nothing in particular. He was a structural engineer. He was steady and kind, and a little quiet in a way I found restful rather than distant. He remembered things, the way I took my coffee, the name of my childhood dog, the fact that I hated the sound of televisions left on in empty rooms. We had moved in together 8 months before the voicemail. It had felt like the natural next step, the way seasons change, not dramatic, just right. We split the grocery runs, argued gently about whose turn it was to clean the bathroom, fell asleep with our books open on our chests. It was a good life. Ordinary in all the ways I had learned by then to appreciate. The first thing I noticed was the phone call he didn't answer. It was a Tuesday in early October. I remember because the maple outside our bedroom window had just started to turn, and that morning I had stood at the glass for a full minute watching one leaf let go. Daniel was at the kitchen table with his coffee when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and something in his face changed. Not dramatically, just a small tightening around the eyes, the kind of shift most people wouldn't catch. But I had spent 3 years learning his face. He pressed the phone face down on the table. "Who is that?" I asked, and immediately felt foolish for asking. We were not the kind of couple who monitored each other's calls. "Work thing," he said, and picked up his mug. I let it go. I told myself I was reading too much into it. I made toast, talked about the leaf, and drove to my office. But something small and unpleasant had taken up residence somewhere behind my ribs, and I couldn't shake it loose. Over the following 2 weeks, I noticed more. He started leaving the apartment after dinner more often. Short drives, he said, just to clear his head. He had never done this before. He began keeping his phone in his pocket instead of leaving it on the kitchen counter the way he always had. He was still kind, still attentive, still himself in all the ways that were visible. But there was a new carefulness about him, a sense that he was holding something gently in both hands, somewhere I couldn't see it. I didn't ask. I watched, and I waited, and I told myself 100 reasonable stories. Maybe he was stressed at work. Maybe he was planning something. A birthday surprise, though my birthday was months away. Maybe I was imagining the whole thing, projecting ordinary fatigue onto a person who had never given me real reason for doubt. I wanted the reasonable stories to be true. I worked hard at believing them. Then I found the receipt. It fell out of his jacket pocket when I was hanging it by the door, A small paper rectangle that said nothing extraordinary on its face. A diner receipt. The Elm Street Cafe, 12 miles from our apartment, in a neighborhood neither of us had any particular reason to visit. 2 coffees, a slice of pie. Total was less than $15. The date was a Wednesday, 3 weeks earlier, a day Daniel had told me he was working late. I stood there holding it for a long time. The jacket smelled like him. The receipt was nothing, really. People stop at diners, people have coffee. I told myself it was nothing, and I slid the receipt into my own pocket, and I said nothing that evening. But I went to sleep that night with my eyes open in the dark, listening to the sound of his quiet breathing, and I thought, why the Elm Street Cafe? Why that neighborhood? Why didn't he mention it? 3 days later, the voicemail appeared. I had left my phone on the kitchen counter and gone to shower. When I came back, there was a notification. New voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. A Columbus area code, but no name. I almost deleted it, assuming it was spam. Instead, for reasons I still can't fully explain, I pressed play. The voice was a woman's voice. She sounded older, 60 maybe, or somewhere past it. Her voice was deliberate, careful, the way people speak when they're choosing every word. She said, "Claire, this is Marianne. I'm sorry to call like this, without warning. I wasn't sure you knew. I wasn't sure how much Daniel had told you. I think it's time we spoke. I'll try again, but if you'd rather call me back, you have this number now. I hope you're well." That was it. 43 seconds. The line clicked off. I stood in the kitchen in my towel, playing it again. Marianne. She had said my name like she knew me. Not warmly, but with familiarity. The careful familiarity of someone who has been thinking about you for a long time. I think it's time we spoke. Not we should talk, but time. As though something had been building toward this conversation for longer than I knew. I wasn't sure how much Daniel had told you. I called her back that same evening while Daniel was in the shower. She answered on the second ring, and I said, "This is Claire. You called me." A pause. Then, "Yes. Thank you for calling back. I wasn't sure you would." "Who are you?" I asked. "I'm Daniel's mother," she said. I sat down on the edge of the couch. Daniel had told me his mother was dead. Not recently. She had died when he was 12, he'd said, from cancer. He had told me this early in our relationship. One of those late-night conversations where you share the shape of your losses. I had held his hand and told him I was sorry. I had thought about her at quiet moments. This woman I would never meet. This absence that had formed so much of who Daniel was. "He told me you died," I said. My voice came out very flat. Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice was tired rather than defensive. "I know. We haven't spoken in almost 20 years. There was a time when we lost each other. When he was still a teenager. It's complicated. And I'm not asking you to understand it all tonight. But I'm not dead." She almost laughed, but it wasn't quite a laugh. "I'm in Columbus. I've been in Columbus for 4 months, and Daniel knows. We've been trying, very slowly." I stayed silent. "I thought you knew," she said quietly. When he started coming to see me, I asked him if his partner knew. He said he'd told you. I believed him for a while. But he missed our last 2 meetings and wouldn't return my calls, and I started to wonder. I don't want to cause trouble between you. That's not why I'm calling. Why are you calling? I asked. Because I'm not going to live forever, she said simply. And I don't want to spend whatever time I have left as a secret. I thanked her. I said I would call again soon. I hung up and sat on the couch for a long time after Daniel came out of the shower, watching him move around the kitchen. And I understood, in a way I hadn't before, why his face had changed when that phone called. He hadn't been hiding another woman. He had been hiding his mother. He had been hiding the fact that she was alive, that she was back, that after 20 years of estrangement, something had cracked open between them. He had been carrying the whole shape of that, the grief of the lost years, the terror of letting it be real, maybe the fear that if he said it aloud, it would fall apart again. In total silence, right beside me. I didn't confront him that night. I thought about it. I lay awake beside him and rehearsed the conversation a dozen different ways, and every version felt wrong. I needed to understand more before I could speak. The next day I called Marianne again, this time from my car on my lunch break. She told me the shape of it slowly, carefully, the way you handle something fragile. She and Daniel's father had divorced when Daniel was 11. The year that followed had been bad in the specific way that years following bad divorces can be. Ugly custody arrangements, financial pressure, two adults in pain making each other worse. Daniel had been caught between them. When she had left Ohio for a few years to get herself straight, Daniel had stayed with his father, and the distance had become a silence. And the silence had become easier than the alternative. I was not a good mother in those years, she said plainly. I'm not asking you to excuse that. I'm just explaining it. When I came back to Ohio, his father had already built a new story. The story was that I had chosen to leave, that I had chosen not to be present. And Daniel had been living inside that story for so long that when I finally tried to reach him, he didn't know how to fit me into his life. But he has been seeing you, I said, for 2 months. Slowly. Coffee mostly. Sometimes dinner. He's cautious with me, which is fair. A pause. I think he hasn't told you because he's afraid that if he says it out loud, that she's alive, she's back, she's sitting across from me at the Elm Street Cafe, then all the grief from before becomes real again in a new way. Does that make sense? It made sense. I didn't want it to make sense because if it made sense, I had no one to properly be angry at. But it made sense. In the days between that conversation and meeting Marianne, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years, looking at old photos of Daniel. He had a few framed on his bookshelf, college friends, a hiking trip, one of him and a man I recognized as his father from a backyard somewhere. His father was still alive in Dayton. They spoke every few weeks. Daniel's relationship with him was civil, functional, the kind of adult-child relationship that has been sanded down to a manageable shape. There were no photos of a mother. I had never asked about that. I had accepted the story I'd been given, that she was gone, that he had processed that grief long ago, and moved on. I thought about how strange that was now, how easily I had not asked. How grief, when someone frames it as settled, becomes a closed room you don't try to open. I went back through small memories, looking for moments I had missed. There was a night, maybe a year into dating, when we had been watching a forgettable drama about estranged siblings, and Daniel had gone very quiet. I had asked what he was thinking, and he had said nothing, just tired, and I had believed him. There was the way he sometimes paused before talking about his childhood, as though running a quick internal check on whatever he was about to say. There was the fact that he had never once, in 3 years, mentioned a single specific memory of her. Not one image, not one story. I had read those things as grief. I had read them gently and wrong. That night, I made pasta, the simple kind because my hands needed something to do. Daniel set the table. We ate. We talked about small things, a problem at his office, a funny thing my coworker had said. And then, in the space between sentences, I said his name. Daniel. He looked up. I know about Marianne, I said. The way his face moved through that moment, I will not easily forget it. Not guilt, exactly. Not the look of someone caught in a lie. More like the look of a person who has been holding a very heavy door shut, and someone has finally pushed from the other side. He put down his fork. His hands were still on the table, and he looked at them for a moment before he looked at me. She called you, he said. Yes. I asked her not to. I know, I said. But she did. We were quiet for a moment. Outside, a car passed, and its headlights swept across the wall, and then it was dark again. How long have you known she was alive? I asked. I always knew, he said. She wasn't there. I thought the easier thing to say was that she was gone. It felt true enough. And then one day it wasn't true anymore. And I didn't know how to walk that back. Why didn't you tell me when she came back? He was quiet for a long moment. Because I didn't know yet what it was going to be. Whether it was going to be something real or whether she was going to disappear again, the way she did before. I didn't want to bring you into something that might just be another loss. He looked at me, and there was something raw in his eyes that I recognized as honest. I was protecting you. I know that's not how it feels. It feels like you decided something about me, I said. What I could handle, what I needed to know. Yes, he said. He didn't try to argue it away. That's what I did, and I shouldn't have. We did not fix it that night. We talked for a long time, until after 11, until the pasta was cold and the kitchen was dark except for the light over the stove. I told him how it had felt to play that voicemail in a parking lot, holding a bag of oranges. He told me more about Marianne, about the first time she had shown up in his inbox, about the first coffee, about the terrifying ordinary strangeness of sitting across from a woman who looked like an older version of someone he had lost. It was a conversation we should have been having for 2 months. It was late, but it was happening. 2 weeks later, I met Marianne. Daniel had asked if I wanted to, and I had said yes before I fully thought it through. We met at a diner, not the Elm Street Cafe, a different one, a little farther from the apartment. She was a small woman with Daniel's dark eyes and gray-streaked hair pulled back simply. She stood when I walked in and held out her hand, and her grip was firm. The grip of a person who has learned not to be tentative. We talked for almost 2 hours. It was not easy or comfortable or warm in the way that some first meetings can surprise you by being. It was careful. It was honest. She did not ask for my approval or my forgiveness. She was clear that those were not hers to ask for. She only told me directly that she did not want to be the reason Daniel was dishonest with the person he had built a life with. He loves you in a way that makes him protective, she said at one point. It's the same reason he didn't let me back easily. He's careful with the people who matter. I didn't know how to answer that, so I wrapped my hands around my coffee mug and nodded. Daniel watched the two of us the whole time with an expression I'd never quite seen on him before. A mix of anxiety and relief so close together they were almost the same thing. The drive home was quiet in the way that some silences are full rather than empty. In those weeks that followed, I thought a great deal about Rachel, my sister. We had grown up in a household where things were not always said directly, where a mother's unhappiness showed up in how long she stayed in the garden, where a father's worry expressed itself through unnecessary trips to the hardware store. We had learned, both of us, to read the shape of what wasn't said. Rachel had responded by becoming someone who talked about everything, loudly, at length. I had responded by becoming someone who watched. Watching had always felt to me like a virtue. It meant I noticed things. It meant I understood people without putting them on the spot. But sitting in that car, I wondered if there was a cost I hadn't fully accounted for. If there were questions I should have asked and hadn't, conversations I had stayed outside of because watching felt safer than entering. If some part of the silence between Daniel and me had belonged to me as much as it had to him. I wasn't ready to say that to him yet, but I held it carefully. She came to dinner at our apartment once in November, and I made soup, and the three of us sat around our kitchen table with the overhead light too yellow and a candle Rachel had given us in the center. And it was awkward and real and somehow exactly the right kind of ordinary. After she left, Daniel washed the dishes and I dried them, and we didn't talk much. Not because there was nothing to say, but because sometimes standing next to someone in a quiet kitchen, passing them a clean bowl, is itself a kind of conversation. He turned off the faucet and looked at me. "That was okay," he said, like he was still deciding. "It was okay," I agreed. "She liked you." "How could you tell?" He almost smiled. "She didn't give you the look she gives people she doesn't like." I asked what that look was. Like she's already calculating the fastest route to the exit. We laughed. It was a small laugh, but it was real. And for the first time since October, the apartment felt fully like ours again. There were conversations Daniel and I had to have that we had been avoiding. Not just about Marianne, but about how we talked to each other when things were hard. About what we owed each other in terms of honesty, even when honesty was uncomfortable. About the ways two people can love each other and still make each other feel alone. One evening in December, after a particularly long and circular conversation, Daniel said something I have thought about many times since. He said, "I think I spent so long pretending she was dead because it was easier than explaining why someone who was alive could still be completely absent. Death is a clean explanation. It doesn't require anyone to ask why." I thought about how many clean explanations we reach for when the complicated ones would ask too much of us. About how grief sometimes is borrowed. How we grieve the story of a loss rather than the loss itself, because the story is more manageable, more finished, more within our control. "And now?" I asked. "Now it's not clean," he said. "It's just real." I took his hand across the table. The candle was burning low in the center. The December wind was finding the gaps in our old windows the way it always did. That faint whistle we had been meaning to fix since we moved in and never quite got around to. I thought, this is what people mean when they talk about love as a practice rather than a feeling. The choosing to remain, the choosing to listen, the choosing to hold the complicated version of someone without asking them to be simpler for your sake. There was one conversation I remember in particular. A Saturday morning in late November, both of us still in pajamas, coffee going cold on the counter. I told Daniel that the hardest part hadn't been the lie itself, or even the receipt, or the voicemail. The hardest part had been realizing that someone else, a woman I had never met, knew something about my life that I didn't. That I had been living inside a story that was missing a character and had no idea. He listened. He didn't try to minimize it. I want to know the whole story, I said. Not just the easy parts. I know it gets messier that way. I still want it. He looked at me for a long moment. Outside, the neighbor's kid was running through fallen leaves, that particular shuffle and crunch of a child not trying to walk quietly. Okay, he said simply. Okay. That was enough. Sometimes enough is exactly the right amount. I still have the receipt from the Elm Street Cafe. I don't know why I kept it. It sits at the back of my desk drawer, tucked under some old birthday cards and a broken watch I keep meaning to fix. That small paper rectangle. 2 coffees, a slice of pie, less than $15. A son having coffee with his mother for the first time in 20 years, trying to figure out if lost things can be recovered. I used to look at it and feel the cold residue of suspicion. The memory of that parking lot, the oranges, the voicemail playing for the 7th time. Now when I come across it, it feels more like evidence of something else entirely. Not betrayal. Not a secret kept for cruelty's sake. Evidence of how much weight a person can carry silently. How much grief can fold itself into the shape of ordinary life. How someone can love you and still fail to tell you the whole truth of themselves. Not because they don't trust you, but because they haven't yet found a way to trust themselves with the story. Marianne's health is not perfect. She doesn't talk about it much, but Daniel does quietly when it's just the two of us. They are making up for lost time in the deliberate way of people who know that time is not unlimited. Small dinners, phone calls, a trip they are planning for next spring, just the two of them, to a place they used to go when Daniel was young and the losses hadn't happened yet. I think about that a lot. About what it takes to return to something after years of it being called gone. About the courage of that, or maybe just the ordinary human stubbornness, the refusal to let the story end on the worst page. The maple outside our bedroom window lost all its leaves by the end of October. Through the winter, it stood there bare and entirely itself, and I watched it from the bed in the early mornings while Daniel slept, and I thought about what it means to know someone. Not the idea of someone, but the whole complicated, imperfect, sometimes hidden person they actually are. The one who has a mother he thought he'd lost. The one who carries old grief in his jacket pocket alongside grocery receipts and chapstick. The one who was afraid that honesty would cost him something he couldn't afford to lose. I love that person. The whole of him. Not just the parts that came easy. That is not a small thing to know about yourself. That you can stay through the difficult truth. that you can hear 43 seconds of someone else's voice, and instead of running from what it means, walk straight toward it. The voicemail is still on my phone. I've never deleted it. 43 seconds of a woman's careful voice and the life that opened up on the other side of it. I don't play it anymore. I don't need to. But I keep it the way you keep certain things. Not because you need them daily, but because they mark where you turned.